Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our webinar about net zero and the way how to achieve that goal. We want to do today a deep dive into the topic and look at it from different perspectives. As you can see, as per our agenda, we'll start with an overview leveraging input from our CEO survey, focusing there on the sustainability questions. And then I'm very pleased to have Fabian Etter, the co-president of Swiss Cleantech, with us, who will cover the topic, the interplay between business and politics and how crucial that is to the success. Then we'll have Jan-Hendrik Völker-Albert, our Head of Marketing, Communications and Corporate Responsibility of PwC Switzerland, talking about our own PwC net zero strategy and our execution plan. Then another highlight of this session today is Flavia Zimmermann, who is with us. She's the head of environmental protection, health management and safety of Siemens Switzerland. She will cover the topic key challenges and learnings of Siemens on the way to net zero. So again, a very practical input into our discussion. I think with these different inputs, we will come then to a good closing session, which will be a moderated panel discussion led by Christophe Bourguin. Christophe is our lead of our investor reporting and ESG practice. So let's dive into the first topic, and that is the sustainability-related findings from our CEO survey. With the 2022 anniversary edition of our annual Global CEO Survey, we explored the current and future challenges of CEOs worldwide for the 25th time. Now, important to note here is that the survey fieldwork was done in late last year, so it does not include the very sad recent developments in the Ukraine. Nevertheless, we believe from a PwC perspective that still these results reflect the confidence and trust in the global economy, as well as on the different concerns and opportunities. It also, I think, still holds true with respect to the view on the business location, Switzerland. What is quite surprising in that sense is how positive and confident the study participants just generally were and are about the development of the global economy. 81% of the participants are highly optimistic that the global economy will grow in the next 12 months. 18% expect significant growth and 39% moderate growth. So, and the Swiss perspective, as you can also see here, is even significantly more positive than the global average results. When you then go to the question of the personal perspective of the CEOs of their own company, optimism is even bigger when it comes to this, the own sales performance expectations. 64% are very confident to extremely confident that sales will significantly grow over the next 12 months. And also now with a time horizon of 3 years, 74% are very confident about that continuous growth. Climate change ranks 5th in the threat barometer. And with a very high 85% of the CEOs in our survey mentioning it. And they rate the urgency of doing business sustainably, for example, with a net zero promise or through carbon neutrality, as equally high. Swiss and international regulations impose sustainability requirements with varying degrees of severity on most companies. Obviously, especially in the financial sector and in energy-intensive industries such as steel, cement, and manufacturing. Sustainability is no longer just a marketing theme, but a matter of mandatory compliance. The intensity of the regulations will only increase in the next few years. It's the good elements of it, but also with the critical elements of it, for sure. Close to 90% of the participants in our survey state that meeting customer expectations or recruiting and retaining employees would slightly to very strongly influence their commitment to a climate neutral and or net zero obligation. And we see that this trend of having these two reasons being very relevant, that trend rather continues to become stronger. 70% of the participants name the achievement of government targets as an important influencing factor. And at 61%, investors are also seen as influencing companies' own climate protection commitments. The external pressure on companies to take concrete measures and to disclose them transparently is increasing overall. This is reflected in the increasing number of cases in which a shareholder association recommends to the general meeting that the board of directors should be denied a formal discharge of liability because of lack of transparent ESG reporting. Probably something, we would not have expected to come that quickly. And it's also then reflected in the voting results that follow these recommendations of this association. So that just shows that the world is really changing. But it's easy said to set up targets. It's much more complicated than to measure it, and particularly also to achieve it. And so what we see is also that CEOs are showing restraint in the implementation of such strategies. 45%, a high 45% have not made a CO2 neutrality commitment to date, which is even higher than the global kind of non-commitment of 41%. And 55% have not defined a net zero target, which is again a higher not percentage than globally. 65% are pessimistic about ever achieving CO2 neutrality or net zero at all. So now the question is that really right to be so pessimistic? Or is it rather to be positive here, say, at least the CEOs are realistic, they see the real challenges to achieve it, and clearly also understand only innovation can really help to achieve these net zero targets in many industries. And clearly one topic which often comes up is the question around the price elasticity of the markets. To what extent are the companies able to sell the products being more sustainable into the different markets? While in some markets, like in most European markets, it will be easier. In other markets, it will be clearly much more difficult, and clients, customers are not ready to pay higher prices. 81% of the CEOs in our survey state that their industries don't yet have a standardized approach to decarbonization. Cross-sectoral approaches to decarbonization are just starting to be established. And uniform standards and frameworks are currently being developed. For these standards and frameworks to be effective, companies need to work with the upstream, the suppliers, and the downstream, i.e. consumers, links in their value chain. That's the complicating factor. They need to communicate interdependencies and jointly define targets. This dialogue is happening, but its progress is still too slow from our perspective. And with that, I would like now to hand over to Fabian to give us some insights about the interplay between politics and business community.
Thank you very much, Andy, for this kind introduction and the presentation of the interesting results. My name is Fabian Netter. I'm, as already mentioned, co-president of Swiss Cleantech. I will take up some of the results Andy just presented and give you an overview of why net zero corporate targets or climate reduction targets in general are so crucial, and especially how regulation is involving and also supporting this development. First of all, what is Swiss Cleantech all about? Swiss Cleantech is a rapidly growing business association with focus on energy and climate. We bring together companies from all different industries, from all different sizes. Many of them already defined the net zero target. Our members together represent around 400,000 jobs, so around 10% of the Swiss GDP. Together with our members, we actually pursue two goals. First of all, we advocate for an ambitious but business-friendly and liberal energy and climate policy, because the regulation and the regulatory environment is crucial to achieve net zero as Switzerland. Entrepreneurial commitment, as we talk about it today, commitment of PwC and also Siemens and many other companies is important, but without the right political framework, through costs, incentives, levies, we will not be able to move forward enough. We have also seen in the CEO survey, for about half of the participants, regulation has a high influence on their climate commitments, and this is why we are a voice in that debate to make sure that the progressive industry is also heard by the politicians. The second goal we pursue is we create networking opportunities for our members, provide know-how and give them visibility. For most of our members, sustainability is part of their strategy. It was also presented by Andy that many companies, they want to differentiate themselves. They want to be attractive as an employer, and we help them in achieving that goal. We, not really surprisingly, we have members like PwC and Siemens being part of the Swiss Cleantech community. Before we go a little bit into more detail, let me give you a short overview of what we want to achieve. What we want to achieve as Swiss Cleantech until 2030, and how this is also linked to the topic of net zero. CO2 must have the right price because it then guides the right investment decisions. And today we take the decisions that will also impact the emissions in 20-25 years. The rising power supply, it needs to be renewable and reliable. To achieve this, however, the regulatory framework must improve significantly. We all know that we're going to need much more electricity in the future than today. CO2-free mobility will be the standard. We are making great progress here as the rising share of e-mobility shows, but there are also other important technologies that we need to support. Public procurement needs to be more sustainable. It's a 40 billion market. If, for example, climate targets of companies, of suppliers become a selection criteria, then this will be an additional important driver for companies to set their self-ambitious targets. Buildings need to be CO2-free and operate also as a power plant. For this to happen, the renovation rate, and this is something that we always need to understand, renovation rate needs to more than double in the next years. To this end, we, for example, as Business Association, have developed proposals for new financing systems for energy efficient renovations. that will also help companies to do their best in making their building park more sustainable. Together, all that should lead to a Switzerland once again being positioned as a leader in climate protection, to achieve also the Swiss-wide net zero target to become net zero 2050, and also helping companies taking advantage of the global entrepreneurial opportunities of the whole development in decarbonization. If Switzerland is a progressive market, if Switzerland is a front runner in climate change, it will help to export our solution also abroad. But where do we all stand with this whole development? I think it's important to understand, despite progress, especially in the area of companies, of the economy, different businesses taking action in the last years, overall, we are not really on track. On one hand, we have not really achieved the reduction targets we set ourselves. In 2020, we were this one element, and on the other hand, after the no to the CO2 law in last June, the unfortunate decision of the Swiss population to say no to this law, we have not really a planning security. We have no really an officially approved reduction target. And this is actually why our climate policy in Switzerland is officially considered insufficient by the well-known NGO called Climate Tracker. So we are on the same boat like, for example, Costa Rica and Peru. So there is definitely something to do. But let me first, before we then go a little bit more into the case studies of Siemens and PwC, where we see the specific challenges of a company going for net zero, what does net zero actually mean for Switzerland overall? And this scenario that I'm presenting here shows the reduction in CO2 emission, how they need to be reduced in the next 20 to 30 years. We need to reduce from around 40 million tons to around 10 million tons. The 10 millions we can avoid only with very great difficulties. They're going to be produced by energy conversion, energy production, by high temperature processes in industry or in agriculture. All the rest needs to be avoided until 2050. And we will have to compensate for this remaining emissions in 2050 via negative emission technologies, like, for example, they are also being used by PwC and Siemens, and they will be presented afterwards. In concrete terms, this means no more emissions in areas like buildings, in areas like mobility. And of course, this transformation is demanding, but it also offers many new opportunities for innovation, as, for example, Siemens, with a couple of products that support this transformation, will demonstrate later on. So a challenging transformation, but with a lot of entrepreneurial opportunities, as we see, and many companies that need to take action. To sum that up and to come a little bit more specifically to the regulatory environment, a lot is happening in politics to accelerate this transformation. So politicians do understand they need to play a role in helping companies to go ahead further and faster. It needs more companies taking action, because otherwise net zero 2050 will be out of reach. The current sad debate about energy security caused by the war in Ukraine is further accelerating this whole development, of course. And I would like to highlight the following regulation streams, as I would call it, that are important for you to understand. First of all, there is a new attempt to revise the CO2 law, which in comparison to the stream of last June increasingly relies on subsidies and certain incentives. Then there is the so-called Gletscher Initiative, which wants to ban fossil fuels until 2050. There is the implementation of the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, the revision of the Energy Act, and this altogether is actually being discussed in parallel. What does that actually mean for companies? What are the major takeaways the companies need to take into account? First of all, Target agreements that help you to get exempted from the CO2 levy. They will be possible for all different industries, so all companies can actually apply for that. Then TCFD will require you, at least if you have a certain size, to report on your climate impact from 2024 onwards. You will get more support in the electrification of your car fleet, more subsidies, especially for charging station. You will get better incentives for domestic investments in renewable energy, especially for winter production. For example, PV plants that help you to produce your own electricity. You will get even more support for clean tech related products and projects. And finally, even training for your employees to help them better understand the relationship between their professional activities and climate protection. So finally, I would like to give you two recommendations. First of all, define a science-based target, maybe with the help of PwC, as we're going to see afterwards what actually science-based targets mean, that are compatible with 1.5 degree or 2 degrees, and help us shape the policy framework in a way that is favorable for the business. Our CEO for Climate Network is a nice platform for doing just that, and we look forward to many new supporters. Let me end with a short story. Bertrand Piccard, he's the honorary president of Swiss Cleantech. He once told me the following story. He had the plan to fly around with solar energy only, a project called Solar Impulse. You see it on that picture. And he talked about this project with aircraft builders, organizations and companies that build aircrafts. They said, this is just impossible, no chance at all. Then he approached ship builders, and they did it because they didn't really know that it was impossible. And sometimes net zero also seems impossible at first sight, but if you just start doing it, you will get there. And with that, I'm more than happy to hand over to Jan, who will share with us the first-hand practical experience of PwC going net zero. Thank you very much.
Fabian, perfect. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. That's a perfect segue to PwC's net zero approach. And for the next few minutes, I will quickly showcase to you our net zero journey. And you can see that here. That's our approach. And to mention that up front, it's not a best practice. That's just our case. But we are proud that we announced 1.5 years ago our worldwide commitment to reach science-based net zero targets by 2030. And to achieve these, our approach is based on four building blocks, and it's operations, supply chain, clients, and the climate agenda. And in operations, we will reduce our scope 1 and 2 emissions with a 50% absolute reduction, and in business travel, also a 50% absolute reduction from a 2019 baseline. In addition, we transitioned to 100% renewable electricity since 2021. In the supply chain, we are proud that we committed that 50% of our global purchased goods and services suppliers will have set their own science-based targets by 2025. And with Christoph and our ESG consulting team, we will actively help our clients to transition to a net zero future. And last but not least, we continue to collaborate with business policymakers and NGOs to actively drive the climate agenda, also with webinars like this. And our approach is, as you can see, based on this net zero wheel. And this follows a simple logic based on a solid measurement, and this is really important, a clear governance and risk management structure. We defined our scope 1 to 3 reductions and will remove the remaining emissions. And thereby our activities follow a clear approach based on the carbon mitigation hierarchy. And that's, first of all, and this is really the most important thing, avoiding emissions. Then reducing emissions, replacing high carbon energy sources, for example, changing buildings, etc. And at the end, of course, offsetting or removing emissions. And how does that look like? I'll quickly go through the wheel and start with a measurement. And as Andy said, that's the elephant in the room. Andy showcased to us the definition and measurement of ESG targets is the biggest challenge for C-level. And I can completely understand that. Even for us, it was a lot of effort to build up and have an aligned methodology and measurement system. But on the next slide, you can see that we invested in transparency. We now exactly know our footprint of 8,600 tons CO2 in the financial year 20. And we know that due to the pandemic, we significantly reduced to 1,400 tons in 21. And that's really important to know these numbers. And now it's up to us to avoid a bounce back and invest into the real behavior and mindset change with a clear focus on our key levers and continuous monitoring. And I also want to share that on the next slide. There you can see how we do that. This is one of our Power BI dashboards and how they look like. Here you can see our current emissions broken down, for example, to flight destinations and with all relevant details. And that's important. And you can clearly see, for example, that internal travel is at PwC responsible for more than 34% of our overall travel emissions. And this is crucial to also develop your measures. And based on these valuable insights, we defined our scope 1 to 3 reductions and the logic how to identify the right measures for PwC. And this is our systematic approach, and that's really, really important for us. We derived our measures based on an in-depth research and clear principles, also actively addressing our challenges and constraints. And based on this, we developed a set of hopefully measures perfectly fitting to our needs. And just as an example, besides reducing direct emissions, switching to renewables, as I said, our core focus was to manage and reduce client-related and non-client-related business travel. And a core learning for us, it's about real change and incentives instead of regulations. And strong lever was, for example, that we stopped cross-territory in-person training events and significantly reduced internal travel. And we decided that we will combine our measures with change management, communication activities, as we will see in a few seconds. And after defining these measures, setting up these measures, we then reduced our footprint, and at the end, we remove all the remaining emissions with hopefully the right set of removal partners. And you can see them here. And we defined a balanced portfolio of short and long-term providers we are working with. And based on this clear set of criteria, we defined that portfolio. And our partners are natural capital partners, more for flexible short-term needs, the Leaf Coalition, planting trees in the rainforest for removal land use. And we are very happy that we selected Climeworks as our provider for technology-based removal, and very early stage, we're in discussion with them. We're in contact with Helion, also for technology-based removal, and also due to their focus on producing synthetic fuel, all based on this clear criteria. And then the final stage in our wheel is the communication approach. And from my perspective, it's extremely crucial and cannot be overvalued. It's crucial for our overall success. And it's based on a simple 4-step logic. And it's hear it, believe it, live it, and really important, celebrate it. And this process starts with a deep understanding and awareness for the topics and end with net zero ambassadors and a broad storytelling approach, also showing and celebrating our successes internally. And on this slide, you can see how that feels and how our communication looks like. And for us, it's important to continuously address net zero with relevant informations across all different touch points, internally and externally, to make sure that step by step, our mindset is really changing. And that's what it's at the end all about. And also at the end of this quick PwC journey, I want to share some learnings with you. And these are the core learnings from my perspective. And as mentioned, investment into data and data quality is key. And from my perspective, the basis for everything and a perfect starting point to embark on the journey. The next thing is culture and mindset. They are definitely the most important change drivers. And that's the only possibility to achieve long-term behavior change and also use the full power and buy-in of your employees to fuel the journey with their own ideas and own commitment. And new ways of working are crucial to reduce air travel, commuting, etc. That's maybe a no-brainer, but for PwC, it's important. Avoiding travel is only possible if we change our system and also drive change together with our clients. And that could be also an eye-opener for other companies and other situations. You really need to change. And internal and external sparring and exchange to maximize results is key. Thanks again to our internal consulting team and also to partners like Swiss Cleantech and exchanges like this. We continuously learn and improve. And at the end, that's maybe also a no-brainer, but net zero is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It's a marathon, but it's worth it from my perspective. And with our net zero activities, we were, for example, able to significantly increase employee satisfaction at PwC, open up also new business areas with that new mindset, gain, for example, competitive or especially competitive advantage in proposals, etc. And last but not least, and do not underestimate that, also gain significant cost savings, not only during the pandemic, but also beyond. And with that, I hope you got a comprehensive overview on PwC's net zero journey. And with that, I would like to hand over to a real best practice and to Flavia. Flavia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So, yes, hello and welcome also from my side. I'd like to start with some words about Siemens, also that you're able to set the content of my presentation in the right context. So Siemens, as you might know, is a global company present in 200 countries and regions. And in Switzerland, we've been anchored since 1894. And here we even are the largest industrial employer with almost 6,000 employees. With 20 locations here in Switzerland, we are present in all parts of Switzerland, and the locations in Wallisellen and in Zug are even covering the entire value chain. So what Siemens does and where Siemens is involved, you can see on this slide. In a nutshell, it can be said that we provide technology in the areas of mobility, buildings, energy, and industry, and we make to operate them more efficiently and help to get that switch to renewable energies. But we not only want to support our customers in that transformation, we also want to lead and be a role model, and that's why we set targets similar to PwC. So we know climate or carbon neutral targets since 2015 already. And last year we signed up for 4 sustainability programs at once. First, we now support 3 initiatives by Climate Group, and now additionally joined the Science Based Target Initiative. These commitments mean that we want to become net zero by 2030 for our own operations, addressing scope 1 and 2, and we want to reduce our carbon emissions in our supply chain by 2030 about 20%. So addressing scope 3 of the greenhouse gas emissions protocol. So why are we actually committed as an industrial partner to those targets? I think there are like 3 main reasons. First of all, also top management, I would say, are aware of climate change. It's reality, it's happening. And we are also realizing that it might have some major impact on all of us, but also on our business. Secondly, we realize that there are increasing demands from governments, customers, investors, but also society. And those are risks and threats that might be like that. But we also see the chances for industry, especially when we are considering and assuming that technology is part or key of this transformation and key to the solution. So now to the interesting part. What are we actually doing to achieve those targets? There we have 5 levers. First of all, we focus on energy efficiency. Here, of course, we do have quite an advantage because we can use our own technology and the expertise of our engineers and experts. So what we are doing is constantly modernizing and optimizing our buildings. And at the moment, and that was said before, we're focusing on improving data management regarding energy consumptions. When we have transparency, of course, then we are capable to come up with further improvement measures. Secondly, renewables. PwC also is purchasing electricity from renewable sources, hydropower in our case. But we are not only focusing on electricity, but we are also tackling the topic of heating. Meaning, in those buildings that we aren't capable yet to switch to alternative heating systems, we are buying biogas certificates. That's not, for a permanent solution, but at the moment, that's what we can do. And now, third topic, decentralized energy system, one of my favorite topics at the moment, because we are right now investing around 70 million Swiss francs in the renovation of one of the last buildings in Zug, meaning that we are installing heating pumps using the lake water from Lake Zug to operate them. And with that huge and big campus in Zug, covering the whole or entire value chain, will become carbon neutral by the end of 2023. Why I'm saying that, and I think that's quite great. I mean, it's an industrial site, and it just shows that it is actually possible. What we also got to go lately is to install PV systems on our rooftops, huge PV systems. I mean, yes, big ones. We're talking about 1,200 kilowatt peak systems, and that's quite cool, good, covering around 1/3 of our energy demand. With Zug now up and running, we are concentrating on the other locations we have, bigger locations we own, and are now working on concepts and feasibility studies. How can we come away from gas heating to alternative systems, and as well PV systems? That's what we want to focus on as well on other rooftops we own. Then another very important topic, especially for Siemens, especially for us with 1,000 service technicians on the road every day for our customers. That's a huge transformation we are tackling now. We just finished up our roadmap, and our projection says that we are going to electrify our fleet until 2028 up to 95%. Not that easy. We will do that, of course, but it's not that easy. And the challenge lies not so much with us as a company, but far more that our service technicians rely on charging at home. And our employees, not all of them, own an own building and can decide on their own. They more often are dependent on landlords and on the decisions made there. So that's why, and one of the reasons why, we are just building up a so-called center of competence, hub functioning department to coordinate demands from landlords, our employees, HR, supply chain, fleet, service providers, electricians, all those stakeholders that are needed to support that transformation towards an electrified mobility system. The last lever, but as always not at least, it's that we are projecting that we won't be capable to reduce all our CO2 emissions, means that we have to come up with some ideas how to deal with that, with the remaining emissions. And that's why we are now working on a strategy. PwC, did the same work. He already had some solutions. It's about offsetting. But when we look how the market is developing, how standards are developing and especially increasing in terms of quality and requirements, we have to focus on nets, negative emission technologies, then we do have to start now and think about that topic and come up with a long-term strategy to tackle that last and remaining topic. Scope 1 and 2, quite easy. A lot of things are aligned and set up already, but now it's going to be tricky because when we look at our supply chain, up to 90% of our CO2 emissions are caused by purchased products and services. So only if our suppliers are going into the same direction as we are even capable to reach our targets. For that reason, and it's as complex as that slide seems to be, as complex it is to integrate sustainability criteria in sourcing decisions and sourcing processes. So what did Siemens do so far? We started, and the key and bottom line is, and we heard that before, transparency. Data transparency all over. Internal processes and especially with our suppliers. So what do we have to do, or what did we do so far? In 2017, we started to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions of our suppliers. We use data models, acknowledged data sources, statistics, by using Estelle. That's an external data modeling tool. And we came up with some calculations there, and we could identify those suppliers with the highest carbon footprint. In 2018 and 19, we addressed like 9,000 suppliers in 90 countries. And you have to be aware that Siemens is that we are talking here about 65,000 suppliers in total. So we addressed 9,000 suppliers in 90 countries, 2018 and 2019. We were asking them for the actual numbers of their carbon footprint, and we were asking what kind of targets they already set themselves. In the meantime, that approach was improved, and now we are using carbon web assessment. That's the first bubble. Last year, we once again addressed like 7,000 suppliers and asked them to use carbon web assessment. Carbon web assessment has two functionalities. One of them is that it shows them what the major CO2 pollutants are and how they possibly can reduce their footprint. That's one. And the second is that it asks our supplier about their actual carbon footprint. And that gives us, again, the basis for a dialogue and for an individual target setting. So that's more the supplier side on corporate carbon footprint, but where we need transparency as well is on the product side. There also we work with a modeling tool to gain more information about the product carbon footprint for two reasons. First of all, our customers are now asking more and more for life cycle assessment, for examples. And on the other hand side, we want to better understand where do we have carbon incentive components in our products, and hopefully to be able to substitute them. So supply chain or procurement is driving those initiatives. That's good, but we shouldn't estimate the role of business, because it's business as well that have to incorporate in their design making and decision making sustainable criteria and aspects. And then when it comes to making decisions and actually purchasing products. It's very important also to include that in, as I said, in the decision making. And that's why we are right now including those sustainability aspects in decision making. But the open question is, when we do have transparency there as well, are we ready to pay more if sustainability costs a little bit more? Who is making that decision? Are we willing to make that decision? And how much are we willing to pay? Some last key keywords or words from my side, key learnings and recommendations. Carl Udo, you said some of what we experienced as well. Clear targets, very important, but not only long-term targets, you also need immediate targets. We seem not to be capable to tackle or to handle long-term targets very well. It's a marathon, that's right, but we definitely should start running. You need good organization. You need the respective know-how in your organization. Sustainability, decarbonization is just one topic. Sustainability as a whole is a very complex topic, very broad. Focus on training and mindset. You need your people, you need your employees. There are a lot of good ideas. And then, of course, it's not just, a one-time thing. You really have to sustainably integrate those aspects in your processes and decision making. And supply chain is just one example I showed. And then last but not least, CO2 price. Do your planning. What measures are needed to decrease your carbon footprint? Do the planning. You have to budget those measures. And then be also aware that at some point there might be remaining emissions and how to deal with them. So ideas are good, very good, but the value is in its practical implementation. And with that, I'd like to end my presentation and hand over to Christoph. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Flavia, and good afternoon, everyone. So I think now is the time to turn to the panel discussion for the remaining 10-15 minutes that we have together. Now I see some of you have already found a way to ask questions using the Q&A tab. So I'll be using some of those, but for those of you who have new questions based on what you've heard, feel free to go into the Q&A tab and feed us with your questions. We'll try to pick as many as we can. So I've been taking a lot of notes, so thanks everyone for sharing all those very interesting insights. I think I'll start with you, Fabian, maybe, because I think on your final slide, you had this statement that triggered some question for me. You said, help shape the political framework. So let me ask you, who's influencing who? Is it the political world influencing the business world, or is it the other way around?
It's probably going in both directions, but for quite a long time, for many business leaders, it was kind of a mindset, less regulation is better regulation. And they basically wanted, especially in the area of climate, environment and energy, it was like, okay, we don't need any rules, we just do our own stuff. We actually have our entrepreneurial responsibility and we're going to solve the topic. But this is just not true. I mean, there are companies like PwC and Siemens and many other front runners. But if we want to achieve this huge transformation of the Swiss society, as I tried to point it out in this graph, where we need to speed up by factor 7 or 8 in the next years, then we need the support of policies. We need the support of regulation. And I think this is a mindset that becomes more and more accepted by business leaders in Switzerland. For example, in the last June campaign for the CO2 law, it was actually the first time in Swiss history that 500 business leaders exposed themselves for an environmental campaign saying, hey, we need policies, we need incentives that help us to do our job. We need planning security. Unfortunately, we couldn't really convince a majority. That was a complex reasons why we couldn't convince the majority. but it's not that they don't want regulation anymore, they want the right regulation. There we basically fight for similar things like you mentioned before, and Flavia also pointed out a price on CO2. We just need to make sure that the costs are really reflected, and then businesses can actually do their job. But we're not there. We still need to do our job. We still need to influence the parliament, for example, because the current debate is showing that the ambition level of the politicians is not really ambition enough. We need higher taxation, for example, higher levies, in order to make sure that we accelerate the way we should accelerate.
Okay, so that sounds like engagement of external stakeholders, and maybe now I want to focus on internal stakeholders, and that could be a question to you, Flavia. How do you ensure proper engagement of your internal stakeholders? Because I assume from time to time there has to be some conflict of interest. And as a matter of example, I think someone was asking the question. One of those is you said you were pumping water from the lake of Zug, but potentially the downside is you're hurting biodiversity. So how do you handle all those challenges?
Yes, and what should I say? I start with the internal interests of conflict, and they lately decreased. In the beginning, like 5 years or 10 years ago, there were a lot of them, and we did have targets, but it wasn't. People didn't realize that it addresses them. So in the last 2 years, a lot changed. I don't know why that is. Is it Corona? Is it that the topic becomes more aware of society and so on? But those conflicts, as I said, decreased a lot. And what also helped, of course, is tone from the top and, very interestingly, incentives for top management. And now what's happening, department heads are accountable for reaching those targets, making a contribution to those targets. And that's why things can speed up, why dialogue within the organization is increasing. And then, of course, a lot of communication is going on at the moment. So employees get aware of the topic, that they are also realize what Siemens is doing, and so on.
Okay. Maybe if I move on, I see there's a lot of questions around change management. I think your response, Flavia, was already touching on this a little bit. But maybe, Jan, would you be able to elaborate a little bit on the change management that you had to manage when thinking about net zero at PwC?
Yeah, Christoph, I can do that. And as Flavia said, it's about the tone from the top. And we really started at PwC, and maybe Andy can also chip in from a certain point with a change and understanding on management board level. And from my perspective, it's crucial that all C-level, all management boards understand that the net zero journey is not a cost case, it's a real investment case, and that it makes sense and that it's worth, and that every company will at the end have great benefits. And it's not only increased employee satisfaction, it's really the competitive advantage, it's cost reductions, etc. And if you want to realize that, that's based on a real change management. And we use our, as I said, hear it, believe it, live it, and celebrate it approach. And first of all, it's for us really making sure that everybody at PwC understands what it's all about. And that is a lot of transparency we are bringing to every employee and showcasing him how our footprint looks like, how we develop on continuous basis. And data and data measurement, our Power BI dashboards are helping a lot to bring this transparency into the company. Besides that, it's really understanding it and also hearing and believing what your, as the employee, what your contribution could be, how you could change, and that's crucial in the change process. And then it's living that. And we decided that we use our, we call that net zero heroes. And these are people from the management board, but also from the senior management and all over the company, showcasing how they individually change and why and how it makes sense to them and also for the company. And this is really strong, that we take role models and communicate what they are doing. And then at the end, it's really celebrating, showing the success stories, showing when we win proposals due to our net zero commitment, how we changed our business model step by step. And overall, that's then part of a holistic communication and change approach. And I can, as I said, really recommend that. It's not about, also Flavia said that, it's not about regulations and limiting activities. It's really about incentives and also from a certain point of having fun and bringing that positive mindset into the company.
And Jan and Christoph, if I may here to add, you know, as Jan said, it's all about communication. I think that's really kind of at the core. And obviously then also starting from tone from the top. But you have to be aware there are lots of difficult discussions where you have to, particularly when talking about avoiding emissions, this may hurt. And then the question is, what are really the alternatives in doing things? We have done always like that. Why can't we do it differently? What are different ways? And then also, what is really the real value of continuing with some activities or maybe then stopping? And I think these are tough discussions, but it helps also to get a clearer picture of whether this is something we need to just accept that there will be emissions and we have to go then through the offsetting, or whether we indeed find ways to stop it or reduce it.
Great. So maybe looking at the time, maybe one more question to you, Flavia. You know, I was just looking at my notes. I think you were talking about making your building emissions free, talking about renewable energy and so on. That sounds like cost to me. So if I wanted to ask you a bit of a provocative question, who's paying for this in the end?
Yes, we are paying for this. Business is paying for this. Two things. I mean, as I said, we do have an advantage. We are using a lot of our own technology, so we do have quite an interest to implement those solutions, our own solutions. That's one side. And the other point is that like 2 or 3 years ago, we installed a sustainability fund that's sourced by various channels and kickbacks we are getting from various points. And with that, we are capable to finance some of our sustainability measures.
Very good. Thank you. So I think we're slowly coming to an end of our webcast. So thanks again very much to all our presenters, but also the audience for your time and for your questions. Whoever has been registering to the WebEx will receive the slides as well as a link to the recording, just in case you would want to use it with anyone else at your company. And with that, I'll let you enjoy the rest of the day, and I say bye for now. Thank you.